Well, hello. Hopefully you can all hear me out there, and I haven't muted myself like I've done many times before. So we're on what was it, day 4 of COP26, and Ed's got his second press conference on the climate scientist Europe. Obviously, got the second one with Ed obviously leading the way. He's got with him today Dr. Elvira. I'm not going to pronounce the last name. I'm going to get it totally wrong. I'm going to try, actually. Paolo Sensei from the Alfred Wenger Industries, and Dr. Victoria Hirth, who's actually here, fellow Cambridge Institute of Climate Leadership. So I'm just bringing it up on the screen so I can actually read it. So quite an interesting day today. I've been walking around COP26, see what's been going on. Joined a funny thing, I put it out earlier, which was about someone saying about Fukushima. Was that yesterday? Yeah. There you go. So quite quick. And also, what was an interesting one earlier? It was about the Fukushima disaster in Japan. Obviously, with the tsunami and the representative of the nuclear arena, shall we say, said that nobody died of radiation, poisoning, or whatever. Which a lot of people were like, really? They laughed, and he was like, whatever. But today was quite another interesting one. It was about wind farms, and I was explaining it takes like 25 years, or they have 25 year life cycle. By the way, let me know in the comments if you can hear me, because I hate to be just talking away and they don't know that I'm talking. Just covering the headphones. You already know, you all watch what I do. It was an interesting one. It was 25 years, 35 years. The blades don't last obviously as long. They do get rotated around, they're not fully recyclable. So yeah, that was interesting. And then I saw people walking around wearing blue t-shirts from the nuclear industry stating, we won't be net zero without nuclear power. Very interesting. Now, bit of fun I had last night. No funny comments, please. Actually, I haven't even commented on this. By the way, let's have a quick look at the. There you go. There's a press room getting ready. Good old Will has already taken the camera in. I was going to show you Victoria and Ed just right here. I haven't. I should have put the movable camera on, so I can't show them. They are working out hard, getting ready for this press conference later. Interesting. But anyway, so I had a little science experiment yesterday with these LEDs. So I had some scientists around me. So I say, right, LED, blah, 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 blah. Can it emit electricity? So I showed them with the electricity, showing that I could power it through. I think I need another coffee. With amp reader and stuff. So I showed them that, and then I showed them that it was producing current, and maybe it's coming from a 9-volt battery. So then I showed my light on top of these LED lights, and they were like, that's very interesting, and it blew their minds. So it was kind of like, I didn't come up with this, somebody sent it to me, blah, blah, blah. But what was interesting was everybody's reaction around that table. There's also, maybe a few more scientists actually to chat with later on in the week. I'm sure Ed will help you by getting the food and have a chat with you. Learned a lot about Antarctica, which was quite interesting last night. So the early hours of 1 o'clock. Then I walked off to my camper van and went to sleep for 4 hours. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the Gritter fans went out and made sure I got woken up. Salt hitting your van is not an easy thing at 4 o'clock in the morning. So let me know in the comments, have you been watching anything else on COP26, or have you just been hanging by waiting to see what I update with? This is my last day here, I believe, unless there was an untold reason why I really need to be walking around being here. There's lots of stuff I can do from back home in base, as they say. Let me know what you think to these live streams of Ed's conference. It's nice to support Scientists Europe, Scientists Warning Europe, as they go about this massive thing for them. Obviously, doing these press conferences. So I'm just going to swap across just to see if I can make sure the live stream's not ready yet. I mean, obviously it's not, but sometimes we might get lucky. But look, press conference microphone, I haven't done really well. It's just a basic camera thing I've set up just so that you can see them getting ready, and also allows us to know when it's about to start. Hopefully swap across and see. Actually, it's better idea. Give me 1 second. I'll just move this up there so that I can swap across and do that. Yeah, so let me know in those comments there what have you been hearing on the news or social media or anything about COP26 and what people have thought about it and what you think of COP26. Now, I am right in my assumptions yesterday that it does seem like a sales thing going on there. Like, we had renewable energy, obviously with the wind farm, talking about all the great reasons why we should have these wind farms. So, obviously, the interesting thing was if you sign up their petition thing to kind of like raise their awareness, what they will do is they will print your name on one of the blades or one of the turbines anyway. So, if you want to, if you support wind power, then by all means. I can't remember. I'll find out who they are. I'll send out a photo. I took a couple of photos. I thought, it's quite nice. But that seems to be like an encouragement to try and get people to obviously get involved and sign up and not put pressure, I would say, but to show that they have people backing them and following them and doing what they can. So, if that's your sort of thing, you think, or even let me know what you think about wind energy. Do you think it's good for the environment? Do you think, it's better? Or, how do you think it weighs up with nuclear fusion? Because the nuclear fusion campaign seems to be saying there is no doubt you can't get to net zero without us. What do you think? What do you think to that? I mean, to me, it's a bit like, well, aren't we just kicking the can down the road a bit? Actually, nuclear fusion is quite clean, to be fair, in one respect. But then you have to put petroleum. You'll update me on the comments, I'm sure what I'm missing. You need to put that somewhere for 100 years. So, it's just not petroleum. But yeah, look, it's been a long day. Woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning by the wonderful Brits, but this one was going to be icy. But actually, it's not been that bad weather here in Glasgow, to be honest. The sun has been shining today. And, I forgot about stuff. So yeah, so what else was there? So I also walked around and looked at a couple of actually booked out conferences. People who were lining up to get in and they weren't allowed in, which was a shame. But with social distancing, with social before I jump on that. Social distancing is obviously what they're doing here. There are marks everywhere. You might see it as the people walk past. Again, there's that causeway where people go through there, and there's food halls that way, and basically halls of food and drink places. And right across there is where all the countries seem to be having all their setups where they showcase what they're doing, how they're going to try and get to their net zero, and companies in their area or in their country, or ideas that they have, and people sort of back them and financial. They're trying to get cooperation from other organisations or financial corporations to try and help them on their way. So it looks like Ed's getting pretty much there. They're ready to start in about 1 minute. Now, we do know that the live streams that I secretly grab, even if it's a secret, I'm saying it on here. But they're just getting ready to do theirs now. So that's a minute behind. So I just should waffle on. Just quick, grab this chair. Look at this. How cool is that? You can make your own chair. Love that. And also, found out they gave goodie bags away that I didn't notice when I first walked in. So I got one of these, free of charge. And obviously a mask that I got somewhere, which I haven't opened yet. I'm using my blue mask. But yes, a refillable water bottle, aluminium, fully recycled, free of charge. And then there is actually water butts all over the place for us to refill out. So it does make you wonder sometimes, when you drink water from this. what more do they use? If I get ill tomorrow, you know why? And there's not any alcohol in it, as it says. So hopefully you're looking forward to this, and just double check to make sure. Yeah, they're still not done this. Oh, here we are. Now you've got to love the tech. Their systems down the road. Great. It's just all what we need, isn't it? See if I can sort this out. Maybe there's a reason why. Maybe the stream will be up in a second. Just wait for that to come on. They say it's a minute behind. A minute's gone past. The spinny thing is obviously telling us that they're loading up the system. But I can see Ed on the TVs in front of me is actually saying stuff. And that press from the camera is just really there, just as a camera, not really with a microphone. So, as we wait for the spinny thing to work, for the connections to the wonderful COP26 platform of allowing us to see and live stream ourselves. Technology. I mean, it was working earlier. The previous web stream was working fine. I hate waiting for stuff. Come on, text. I want to hear what you're saying. You should put that mic on it. Just to prove Ed is in there. If not, what we'll have to do is upload a copy of the video file, unfortunately, if this doesn't work. Maybe a reboot required. Let's try it. Let's try it again. There we go. Not hearing the sound, just bringing the picture to the people. There we go.
Yes, but we cannot see you. I am Professor William Umah from Tufts University. I'm a climate scientist who has been a 5 times IPCC author. When the IPCC tells governments that they must act rapidly to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030 and be net zero carbon by 2050, what they're actually saying is we must limit the amount of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere by stop putting them in and increase rates of removal. Unfortunately, many governments are still protecting and promoting and subsidizing the very industries that are reducing the emissions from our fossil fuels, from the products we use, and by supporting the harvesting of forests and the clearing of forests for agriculture and for urban development. I and my other IPCC colleagues were early adopters of many of the technologies that are now available at very low cost. I have been living in a home that I designed with an engineer and architect 15 years ago that generates all of the heat and light and electricity through solar panels in a climate that is -5 degrees Celsius. And we export surplus to the grid. I also, a few years ago, purchased a battery-powered electric vehicle, which I charge from my own panels, driving about 11,000 kilometers per year. So the technology is here, the options are here, the cost is reasonable, and it's a transformation that we have to make.
Thanks very much, Bill. And the paper we're about to talk about and deep dive into a few aspects of addresses 6 main stressors. So it looks at population, it looks at short-lived pollutants, energy and economy, nature and food. And this particular paper is warnings into action. So it's also looking at actions that can be taken by individuals, but also leaders at every single level of society, be that community parish level, regional and city level, or national and international level, like at COP26. So I'd now like to invite Elvira Polochanska to talk and to concentrate on the nature aspects of the paper and the action that we need to be taking.
Thank you very much. So nature is our lifeline. We rely on nature for planetary health. We rely on nature for food, for food security, for safe and clean water, for well-being, for cultural and spiritual aspects, and for community cohesion. But nature is struggling under the burden we have placed it. At present, around 77% of land, excluding Antarctica, and 87% of the ocean have been modified by the direct effects of human activities. We've seen catastrophic declines in many species, habitats, and ecosystems, including the loss of 83% of wild mammal biomass, half of that of plants, and at least 1/3 of the fish stocks in the ocean are overfished. Nature and climate are intertwined. To tackle the climate crisis, we need to tackle the biodiversity crisis. To tackle the biodiversity crisis, strong, rapid, and sustained reduction of greenhouse gas emissions are necessary. So climate change exacerbates risks to biodiversity and natural habitats, but there are also solutions to be found within the natural world. So rewilding, conserving, rebuilding our wild environments will contribute to our goals for a sustainable and just world. So actions that protect, sustainably manage and restore ecosystems and address societal challenges are often referred to as nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions can play an important role in climate mitigation, and they can be effective, but most effective when they are well planned, when there is inclusion of local communities, and when the synergies and trade-offs are considered. So for example, natural and managed ecosystems and their biodiversity play a role in the fluxes of greenhouse gases, as well as supporting climate adaptation. So halting the degradation and the destruction of carbon-rich ecosystems such as forests, wetlands, and peatlands would provide substantial benefits for climate mitigation. But we're going to have to find novel and inclusive approaches to avoid potential risks to food security and ensure other benefit flows from nature. So in the ocean, we have in the ocean, 1/3 of fish stocks are overfished. 1/3 to 1/2 of vulnerable marine habitats have been lost. But again, there are substantial areas of wilderness in remote region, and large populations of marine animals can still be found. And a global rebuilding effort of exploited fish stocks could increase fishing yields by around 50% and profits by around 80%. So recovery rates in studies that we've looked at suggest that substantial recovery of the abundant structure and function of marine life could be achieved by mid-century if major pressures, including climate change, are mitigated. So rebuilding marine life and rebuilding life on land represents a doable challenge for humanity. It's also an ethical obligation and a smart economic objective. In order to do this, it will require a global partnership of diverse interests, including governments, businesses, resource users, civil society, evidence-based action plan, metrics for success, and it also requires leadership to assemble the scientific knowledge and technologies required. However, on land, we have potential through so rewilding and reforesting our land areas, but again, for nature-based solutions, the question, the activities have to be the right approaches in the right places. So, sorry. And there are also opportunities in our urban areas. Urbanization is another one of the grand challenges that we're facing at the moment. It's one of the mega trends. But building green infrastructure in our cities, including plants and trees within our cities, so green infrastructure can provide shading and help us build more resilient cities. There are also other examples include combinations of nature-based and technology-based solutions. So for example, grazing beneath solar panels can enhance soil carbon stocks and also provide habitat, for example, pollinators that are so important for our agricultural landscapes. However, for all of this to happen, we also require rapid and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The recent Working Group 1 report has sent us a warning around the need for ambitious mitigation. Nature cannot do it all on its own. Actions to enhance the adaptive capacity of ecosystems are placed at risk by unabated climate change exceeding adaptation limits, highlighting the importance of keeping warming well below 2 degrees. According to the IPCC SROC report, that at a 1.5 degree warmer world, we've got a high risk of losing 70 to 90% of coral reefs and the services that they provide to mankind. So actions that enhance the adaptive capacity of ecosystems are placed at risk by unabated climate change exceeding adaptation limits, and also by high levels of other pressures, such as land use change, pollution, overexploitation. So every local initiative matters, since the benefits of many small local biodiversity measures will accumulate at a global level. So I've given you some example using nature-based solutions within urban contexts. For example, can make contributions to global mitigation and biodiversity protection. So I think I shall finish there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elvira. And just before we hand over, within the paper, but also often mentioned in other circles, is an aim for us to get to 30% of our natural habitats protected, both land-based and sea-based, by 2030. Do you think that's the right kind of target we should be going for, and any thoughts on how we could get there?
Yeah, so at the moment we protect around about 15% of land and 7.5% of the ocean area. And many of these protection measures at the moment, they're either poorly designed or they're poorly implemented or they're not enforced. So if we're aiming to meet the objectives of sustainable biodiversity, a habitable planet and quality of life, we need action at local, regional and global scales to protect around 30 to 50% of both land and the ocean surface. This can be done through widespread conservation, through efforts for rewilding, for reforestation, for rebuilding of marine biodiversity, and giving natural habitats the resilience to support a rich biodiversity, but also have functioning ecosystem services to support human communities.
Great, thank you, Elvira. And in fact, the World Scientists' Warnings into Action paper also talks about protecting older trees that are currently in the ground, which is certainly something which all over the world tends to be being neglected. And it was interesting that Elvira mentioned local projects, particularly to protect pollinators. There is a project which I was involved in a small way in the UK, where in a local community of about 4,500 houses, wildflower seeds were provided out to every single house in the whole area in a project called Bees Squared, putting a square of wildflowers into a front garden to create it. That community project, which was in 4,500 houses in one parish, is now planned to take place in 30 or 40 parishes, may eventually be moving up to 500 parishes or more, or even countrywide. And these kind of small actions can scale up to massive things that can be done. I think that brings us on then to our next topic, and that's moving on to governance and its related issue of leadership. And the World Scientists' Warning into Action paper talks about leadership at every single level. So as we said earlier on, from community level through up to city level, national level, and even the international requirements at a conference like COP26. So just wanted to give you a slight preview before we go to Victoria's talk. We really need governance at all levels to determine what are the really important things that need to be worked on and prioritize those. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So we need to move away from that kind of attitude to focus on what is required for humanity's survival on the planet. Now, moving on for that then, so I'm delighted to have Dr. Victoria Hurt here. And Victoria, over to you.
Thank you. Yep. Yes, thank you, everybody. So as Ed clearly outlined and the paper's clearly outlined, we have for a long time, and increasingly so, know what needs to be done. We have the solutions. We know the action that's required, but bringing that into the decision-making at every level in all kinds of organizations is a very complex, can appear a complex task, because ultimately the issues that we have are as a result of many, many, many micro decisions, often done with good intent, often also done with bad intent. So the question is, how do we get a grip in the short time scale we have with those issues that we have? And for me, one of those big leverage points that we need to be focusing on massively is governance of organizations. And it's for that reason that I spent the last 5 years bringing about, chairing with my co-convener, the process to create the world's first global view on the governance that's needed in organizations for the 21st century in the context of unsustainability and building a sustainable future. And I'm going to give you a bit of an overview as to that standard and really raising the awareness of the fact that this is a tool that every one of us can be using, because it's applicable to all organizations, from a one-person organization up to the largest organization, and including government and charities and corporations and everything. So if we want to really drive the change we need to start getting very governance literate, and we need to know how to run organizations with good governance, and we need to know how to hold to account those organizations using our knowledge of governance systems. So in the paper, the question is, we ask again, what kind of leadership and systems of governance will take us successfully into the future? This is from the latest scientist warning. And of course, we know SDG 16 is about institutional capacity and building strong institutions. And we know that, of course, governance is at the very heart of that. So in September, it was therefore very exciting for the world that we had this announcement of ISO 37000, the world's first benchmark in good governance of organizations. And there's also a Wall Street Journal article you can look at there about what this means in terms of corporate governance specifically. So why an international governance standard now? Well, you may not realize, but at the moment, well, firstly to say governance is a relatively new topic. So it's only really in sort of the 60s and 70s we even started to get to grips with it. When we started to get to grips with it, it was in a time of a certain kind of economic thinking, which I'll come on to in a minute. But what we've ended up having is a sort of investor-focused, mainly investor-focused approach, but not entirely, to governance. That has come out in partial ways. So much of what we know about governance and what we think about governance comes, for example, from large stock exchanges that have certain requirements for organizations in relation to that. And you can see that there is a split, and not everyone has a governance code or standard that's relevant to them. Some have 2 or 3 because they have complex organizations, and each of them have something different to say about the topic. So what we set about was to try to standardize and get underneath to say, what are we really talking about here? And of course, this is really important specifically for all organizations, all countries, but developing countries. And that is because in developing countries, there's often a lack of institutional capacity that you don't see in other systems. And we know this from the Corruption Perception Index and Ease of Doing Business, that often it can be a real struggle when you don't necessarily have the institutional capacity to debate and institutionalize good governance. So this really is also of service to countries that are looking for guidance. But I would say that is not exclusive. All countries need this guidance. So I'd like to just pull out a few things here that I think are particularly important in this context. We know that an economy is about transforming resources into long-term well-being for all people and planet. We know that organizations are the means that society has decided that we can best enact the economy. We also know that all organizations are created to help individuals come together to achieve a shared clear goal. And governance is what provides the direction, accountability, and oversight of organizations so that they can achieve the goal in the way intended. But we also know that governance until now has been mostly focused on the goal of optimizing benefits to the organization itself, including members, which are also known as shareholders, but it could be members, it could be partners, it could even be a community, but it's an inward focus and moving now more towards also survivalist focused, but that's the basis of decision making. Whereas the end goals of long-term well-being for all and the health of the social and environmental systems that this well-being depends on have really been ungoverned. They've been out of sight, off limits. And of course, this view is changing fast with the well-being economy, purpose-driven organizations. And so we're moving towards directly delivering, asking organizations to directly deliver the end goals of long-term well-being for all, i.e. sustainability, in a way that protects the social and environmental systems that underpin this. And ISO 37000, in my view, really formalizes. So I would like to draw your attention, and this is a diagram that I use quite often, to better describe what I have just been talking about. So this is Daly's triangle that I've adapted to use the capitals model that's often used, for example, from the International Integrated Reporting Council. And I'm not going to dwell too much on it now, other than to say that what I was just expressing there about how governance has mostly been in the middle of that triangle. Governing for intermediate means for intermediate ends. And that was Daly and Donella Meadows' clear message. And what is out of scope is the top of the triangle and the bottom of the triangle. So we need governance and we need organizations that are governing to the whole of a sustainable economy. And that is what I believe ISO 37000 helps us with. So really, this was a document whose scope was to provide principles and practice specifically for governing bodies of any kind, even if that's one person, because it's a one-person organization, but it's applicable to any organization in any size, any country, any area, and also of relevance to stakeholders who want to understand governance and hold organizations to account. It took, in total, 5 years of development. 77 countries were involved, and all 164 members of ISO had an opportunity to vote in the final round. 24 liaisons, and it was finally published in September. Again, I won't dwell on this, but this is a list of, you can get a sense of some of the organizations that were involved in terms of liaison. And this is a model that, or a diagram that outlines the 11 principles. And as you can see, it has purpose at the very heart, and that is the foundational principle on which everything else hangs, and that's about the governing body defining its purpose in relation to its stakeholders and society, and defining its values. And then we have foundational principles, value generation and strategy, and then with purpose form the direction aspect of governance, then accountability and oversight. And then as supporting principles, stakeholder engagement, leadership, data and decisions, risk governance, social responsibility, and viability and performance over time. And so the standard goes into quite a fair bit of detail, and I personally, because I just was there to bring about the global consensus, the level of consensus that we could get on these really critical, crunchy topics was quite outstanding to me. And it gives us, therefore, a guide within which we can move forward and really understand whether we have organizations that are fit for purpose. So I encourage you to buy the standard. It doesn't cost that much, but there is also a good overview online. And also to just give you a sense of what people are saying about the standard. So George Dallas of the International Corporate Governance Network says, in essence, that 37000 guidance provides a rigorous and systematic framework on the governance of organizations. It is thoughtfully and carefully crafted. And Colin Mayer from the University of Oxford, who's been working a lot on purpose-driven organizations, says that ISO 37000 is of profound significance in establishing the global standards of governance that are required to meet the challenges of business, society, and the environment in the 21st century. So I encourage you all to do what you can to bring 37000 about in all the organizations that you are engaged with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. If we were just going to ask a question really for a 20-second answer, we've got all these other problems, we've got all these things that we need to do. Why is governance so important rather than focusing on one of the other areas?
Well, really, it's because governance is the crux point. It's the major leverage point. We can't hold accountability and create legislation for every single action that an organization does. We will tie ourselves in red tape as we are continuing to do so. But if we can legislate and hold to account the governance system in order to create a framework within which then the organizations can flourish, be innovative, and be free to do what they need to do. So I really do think the way we need to go is starting with those organizations for whom that governance system has huge impacts, the larger organizations, but eventually to all organizations. If we do that and we focus our attention there, we will get a lot more change than we will by focusing on any one of those behaviors that might be in that system.
Great, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our briefing now, and I just wanted to bring us back to where we are at COP26 at a moment in time where we're really, really requiring top leadership. And that's what we're demanding of those leaders at COP26. It's as if currently that we're in a race. We're going for this 2050 target, which is the wrong target. And we issued a letter signed by a lot of the top climate scientists only last week saying that 2030 or as near as possible is the right target. It's like we're running a marathon and the pack are running, and Britain and a number of others are at the front of that pack doing some of the right things. And as we go forward to that marathon, though, we're not going to break the world record. And the only way to break the world record is for one of the runners to break from the front, to do something much bolder, to get us on the right track to 2030 or something as near as possible, and then save humanity in the process. And the pack will follow if a bold leader breaks from the front. Thank you very much, everybody. We're now come to the end, and I would again say, can all of the scientists please look at planetincrisis.com and review the paper and sign it. Okay.
Let's hope if I unmute the mic. So interesting thing about trees, about ISO 37000 or whatever it was. Yeah, and obviously about the sea and what's going on. So hopefully we'll catch up later on in the week with those scientists, and hopefully a lot of that information as well, maybe. They're in private interview with me, myself. So let me know in the comments. Let me know how you found the second press conference from Ed and the team at Scientist Warning Europe, and yeah, keep involved and let me know. And again, can't knock it. This chair actually works. It's still one of the best ideas I've seen here all day. Anyway, thanks for watching. Catch you again.